Hello world. So I've decided to try a bit of an experiment where I'm going to run a blog, um, specifically about stress and depression, which I know doesn't sound like the most fun, um, but even though it's not the most eye-catching way to start a project, I think maybe it's worth talking a little bit about why I'm doing this. First and foremost, I have the goal of making a sort of journal to myself and having an output where I need to post online sort of gives me an external deadline for getting a project done, which is immensely helpful for someone like me who is really fond of procrastinating. It's not a magic bullet surefire way of getting things done, but it helps a lot. Secondarily, I also want to do this because I think there is a lot of taboo still talking about mental illness. It's getting a lot better, but I posted on my Facebook about having stress, and uh, I it was actually just supposed to be a public service announcement, just explain to people, hey, not feeling so well, I am. I am probably not going to be able to reply to messages because part of my condition right now is that looking into my inbox is actually taking a huge toll out of my mental energy. I was just trying to explain to people I'm not going to be able to reply quickly. By saying not replying quickly, I mean I am not. It can be days. Just felt that was needed in my social sphere, so they didn't think I was just a dick trying to avoid them. But the reply was not so much, oh, nice to know, but I was just inundated with messages and comments of love and caring, and I hadn't seen that coming. Not that I thought people wouldn't necessarily care, but more that people felt really moved to act upon hearing this. And a friend of mine wrote as a comment when I said, "Oh, thank you so much for all this attention and this care. I didn't mean for this to blow up this way, um, but it means a lot." And he wrote back that he thought it might be because there's still so much taboo about this, that the fact that I just said this openly was something that he, as someone who had himself been on sick leave because of stress, found inspiring. So, one, I can make a diary for myself, and two, if someone else ends up stumbling across this diary, it's purposefully in public, so that if you find something that sounds familiar, it might be able to help you, and maybe you can avoid some of the mistakes I made, and maybe you will feel more comfortable speaking up yourself. So maybe no one will see it. It is YouTube, and as I like to say, like throwing. Actually, it's not my own words even. It's TTRPG who said, making videos for YouTube is sort of like being stranded on an island and putting a message in a bottle, and tossing it into an ocean consisting exclusively of messages in bottles. So I don't think this is necessarily gonna go anywhere, but I think the motives behind the project is enough to validate why I think it's worth trying. So there's that. So with the title, I am here. I I've ummed and erred a lot about what I should call this, and I think I am here is pretty good, all things considered, because I am going to rip off completely the format that LittleKuriboh did for his series We're Still Here. It was a series where he talked about his own depression. I'll link in the doobly-doo. And by the way, Martin, I know you have thousands upon thousands of subscribers, but I am using my clout of like 4 or 5 subscribers and helping you out. You're welcome. Just that was a joke in case. in case it wasn't clear. No, but I like that the title contains an homage to the idea I'm ripping off. But I also think like the best titles, in my opinion, is something that lends itself to multiple valid interpretations. So it's also me just talking about where I'm at, both to my future self, but also to people in general. And it's also a title that sort of emphasizes this is a thing that's happening. It's surprisingly common that people suffer from depression and stress. And this is something that's here. I am part of that something. I am here. The one thing I dislike about this title is it has sort of there is that superhero connotation to it. All Might from My Hero Academia. Fear nothing, for I am here.
Have no fear, students. Because I am here.
That's not at all the vibe I'm going for, but well, I can explain my way out of making sure that's not what I mean by this. I mentioned just now that I'm ripping off a format, and that format is essentially, like I said, from LittleKuriboh, and it follows three parts, strictly speaking. There is part one, which is housekeeping, I suppose you call it, just a little status update on what's going on right now. That's what I'm doing right now. There's part two, which is something that makes me happy. And then there's part three, where I talk about a specific phenomenon within stress and depression. So to that end, having now done the housekeeping, here's something that makes me happy. There's very little of this that I think will come out in any specific order. I mean, I could pick my wife as something that makes me happy, as the first thing, but somehow it just felt most right to start with something that has made me happy for just such a long time, and that is tabletop RPGs. Now, for the totally uninitiated, a tabletop RPG is a tabletop role-playing game. You can use a lot of different systems to play this, but here's the basic framework. You got players, and they each play their individual character. Then you got the game master, who then runs the world that these characters interact with. So essentially, players take actions, the game master informs them of the consequences, and when you got that thing down, you are playing a tabletop RPG. Different systems have different rules for determining how to handle conflict, combat, and challenges, but essentially, you got players playing the individual characters, and you got a game master adjudicating the rules and the world in general. Now, as you may be able to guess from that framework, that means you can play these systems in a lot of different ways. Some use them as straight up games where you have a precise objective that you're trying to accomplish, and once you do that, you win. But others use it to tell a story. So how to play this varies from system to system and from table to table. And that freedom of creativity is actually a huge draw of the hobby. I think Matt Colville summarized it best when he said, "It is the most fun you can have with your brain." It's a really fantastic hobby, but interestingly, for nerds, interestingly, I didn't actually start like most people do with Dungeons and Dragons. I started with World of Darkness and games like Mage, The Awakening, and this was back in Danish, so back in folkeskolen, which is basically puppy school. I must have been 12, 13-ish, and because all teenagers are some version of an insecure idiot, well, most anyway. My little social circle took a lot of pride of, we're doing mature, like World of Darkness, edgy content. We're not a bunch of losers playing with a D20. Ooh, we're so much better. From there, even though I hadn't played much Dungeons and Dragons, though I actually did get to play advanced D&D, which is something impressive for a guy younger than 30. But from there we actually moved on to Exalted, which is also made by White Wolf, and it just catered so perfectly to my taste, because I was really into anime at the time. This was 9th grade, so I've been, 15ish, about 15, and I was in love with anime. I watched a ton of Bleach. And this was a role-playing system that actually allowed you to play stuff like that out. From there, I ended up falling in with some Genesis. This is Terranov setting. This is not actually my book, I should say. It's on loan. But in the end, all roads lead back to Rome, and now I am an avid D&D 5th edition player. I love this system so much. So yeah, I run a pretty wide gamut of different systems, which is just to say that I freaking love tabletop RPGs, but what is it that's so great about them? And it's really hard to condense into one thing. When I started the hobby back when I was a budding teenager, a lot of it was about the power fantasy, especially when you're a kid, you have very little influence, you can't really do much. So the idea that I got to play this cool lawyer who solved supernatural crimes, like I'm a badass, which is a fix that hits the spot when you're an insecure teenager. But it's a fantastic hobby in that it can mature alongside you, and it always matures in pace with you because you're the one who runs it. So it's a tool with which you can you can just use it to play games. You can just kick the door in and then slaughter a bunch of goblins in a dungeon if that's what you're in the mood for. But it also allows you to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. Try to invent a character that's different from you. If you're into exploring that, it also allows you to immerse yourself in the narrative in a way that I don't think any other medium quite succeeds at. And to emphasize how immersive it can be, I played a one-on-one session with my wife at one point, and I was the game master, she was a player, and I don't think I'm necessarily any ridiculously awesomely talented storyteller, but in the very first session there was a scene where she was able to communicate with her lover. They were separated. They were in two different realms, and for a brief moment they could talk together, kind of like that episode of Doctor Who with Rose and the Doctor on the beach. If there are fellow Whovians watching this, and like I said, this was the very first episode, but that dialogue between those two moved her to literal tears. Like she was crying, and it was part of her just acting out the character, but she was also genuinely moved by the moment. And this was a character that she'd only just gotten to know mere moments ago, because we sort of just started playing. The inciting incident of the adventure was that she was tossed out of the world she belonged in, and now in a different, foreign, strange land. And that's what I mean by the power of role-playing. Like, you can just use it for running a game, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, but you can also use it to immerse yourself in the narrative and explore ideas and emotions. And for that reason, it's also one of the most amazing creative outlets. Like, you can be a player and just funnel all your creativity into how does this character think, but I tend to run as a game master, and whenever I have a moment to myself, let me say it like that, I can always talk a little bit more about to myself, I should say, a little more about how I want to advance the narrative or continue the game, or what would happen if I expose this player character to these circumstances. Like, there's just so much to invest in, and it's also just an amazing social tool. A bit of a problem I think I might have now is, how do you make friends outside of role-playing games? Because all the friends I've developed over the past 5 years has either been through theater or it has been through role-playing. Like, I also made some friends in uni, but the people there I became the best friends with were people who I had hobbies outside of uni with, and most of that was role-playing games. There's such a wealth of experience and creative outlet and friendships to perform for this hobby. Like I said, I'm you may be able to tell I'm finding it difficult to put precise words into what's so great about this, and it's just because there's so many wonderful different aspects, and this is something that has been running in my brain since I was maybe 12ish. So with all that richness and with all that wealth of wonderful experiences that has been there for 1.5 decade. It seemed indecent not to use that as my first outing for something that makes me happy. I've had multiple run-ins with stress in my time. Yeah, I don't know if I qualify as young anymore. I'm 27, so that seemed close enough to 30 that I don't qualify as young anymore. But within my limited time span, my short time span, I have had a handful of run-ins with stress, and I think the most useful thing I can say up front here in the first episode is it's not always obvious that it's that stress is what's getting at you. Sometimes it is, and I can tell a brief story about when it was. It was my second to last year of uni, and I had also just gotten a job where I taught English at tech college, which meant that I taught media graphic students English, and I taught plumbers English. Now the thing is, at the school, these were two different branches of the school. They used the same shuttling system, but that system only took into account, am I being asked to teach classes at the same time in two different places? So as long as that didn't happen, they just scheduled classes for me, which meant that they didn't really take into account the amount of hours that I had agreed in total to work for the school. At the same time, I also had my studies, and at the same time, we were also producing a Shakespeare play in a University Shakespeare Company. Yeah, to say the least, I was just swamped, and I never had a quiet moment to myself, because there was always something I needed doing. I needed to do my homework, or I needed to finish a hand-in, or I needed to show up for rehearsal. And when I was there, I was supposed to know my lines, and all of that was while I also had actual job obligations to keep in mind now, lessons to prepare, hand-ins to correct and grade. All the while, I was new at this job. Now, this is what people usually talk about when they say that they're stressed, that they have too much to do within too little time. And that is its own bag of problems. It's a very common bag of problems, which all the more reason that we talk about it and we try to look at how do we fix this. But there is another side to stress that I think is less obvious. So right now I am unemployed. I live in Denmark, which means that I have a few years within which I can get a job, and my unemployment insurance pays me a salary each month, and my job is essentially just I need to apply for jobs. I need to apply for 2 jobs each week. I have a total of 2 years to land the job. Now, as you might be able to tell, applying for 2 jobs a week doesn't take up the entire week. It actually left me with an awful lot of free time, and that meant that I didn't really think whatever was wrong with me could be stress. But the problem was that I still, in spite of having a lot of free time, never actually had a quiet moment to myself. I was always thinking that I could be doing more. Like, the bare minimum is 2 jobs, but you can apply for 2 or 3 or 4 jobs. Have you brushed up your resume? Have you looked at more videos about how to go to job interviews? Like, there was never it wasn't like a 9-to-5 job where, it's 5 o'clock, you go home now. There's always more you can do. And then there's another aspect of stress that I think gets a little overlooked. Maybe it's just my experience, but it's that one of the symptoms is anxiety. You get very, very anxious. And what made me anxious was this prospect of I'm going to run out of time on my unemployment insurance. And because of that, I will be tossed into a much crueler system from whence I shall never actually get a job that I in any way want to work with. And I was essentially just, the technical term for it is catastrophizing, where I saw all possible avenues for the future as awful ones. That I was just looking at my own doomsday clock slowly approaching midnight, and that anxiety also meant that I never really could relax. So that's one of the first things I really want people to take away from this. Stress, even though because of the way we normally refer to it, because of the way we normally talk about it, can sometimes creep up on you in unexpected ways. And it's sort of a surprise that it crept up on me, because I had experienced classical stress before, so I should be able to have recognized the symptoms a little earlier than I did. And with that in mind, maybe just now is a good chance to talk a little bit about some of the symptoms that I experienced. I already talked about anxiety. That was one of them. I talked about the catastrophizing. The way I was explained this symptom by my doctor is essentially you are there's a metaphorical dark cloud hanging over your head, and you start approaching everything like things will never be good again. This is from now on. From now on, everything is awful. Which of course also hinders your ability to relax. I also had some physical symptoms. I felt like I wasn't in my body, which I know is a very abstract way of putting things, but it felt like my sense of touch had lessened, and I didn't. It felt like my body moved on its own, and it didn't really matter what I was doing. Maybe I was making a cup of coffee for myself, but everything felt like it was running on routines. Like I wasn't actively trying to make myself a cup of coffee. I was just a passenger in my own meat suit, being transported from the boiler to the coffee in the cupboard, to the cupboard with the mugs in, and I also experienced from time to time a racing heart. I don't think I experienced the discomfort that some people report when they talk about racing heart, but I would sit and try to watch something with my wife, and suddenly I could just feel my pulse intensifying, and I felt myself getting warm. And I wasn't actually sweating, but I felt like I was warm, and it sort of contributed to that thing I said earlier about feeling like a passenger in my own body. And in a moment of disbelief, I would actually just sit and try to measure my pulse and understand, am I actually experiencing this? Is this really happening? Why is my body reacting as though I'm in danger? And that's essentially what actually happens when you experience stress. Your body is entering into an alarm system mode, so it's always on guard, and when it keeps being on guard, it's sort of like tensing a muscle, and at some point, the muscle, you can't keep tensing, like it's impossible, but it's like something just locks in place when you experience stress, and you are constantly tense, and you end up tensing so much you sort of damage your muscles. I know I'm using a metaphor about the body to explain a different bodily experience, and I hope that's not too confusing. But it's essentially like that, except the muscle in this example is your nervous system. The final symptom, there are many, but I think just to wrap this up, the final symptom that I want to talk about is impossible tasks. I don't know if there's an actual term for it, but it's the phrase I have used. I call it the impossible task. Now, what is the impossible task? It varies from moment to moment, but the idea is that you have something you need to do, and you just can't. And usually it's not actually a task that's all that difficult. For me, it was checking my emails and opening up messages on my phone. That's easy. Like, I can grab my iPad here and do it now. Like, there's nothing physically stopping me from doing it, but there was something mentally blocking me. Like, it costs so much energy for me to do that. And I just, I just berated myself for being unable to do it. I didn't really recognize that this was a symptom of a disease. It is, though. Now, sometimes it was the emails that was the impossible task, but I could have dishes that needed doing. And I would spend all day doing nothing except just trying to amass the energy to do the dishes. And then I'd finally get them done. But by that point, it was 5 in the afternoon, and it was the only project I'd accomplished. And it's also contributed to a feeling of shame, which sort of created this vicious circle. These are just some of the symptoms I've experienced. But if you're experiencing something like this, it's worth talking to other people, because the one thing that helped me realize that I needed to get help, to go on sick leave and get better, was something my wife said to me. What she said was, "But it's not supposed to be this hard." And she didn't say it in a condemning way. I didn't feel judged by it. It was just matter-of-factly. Like, yeah, opening up a text message shouldn't be this hard. Doing the dishes shouldn't be this hard. And the fact that it's hard for me doesn't reflect poorly on my character. It reflects poorly upon my health. I'm probably going to do an episode dedicated solely to shame at some point. But for now, if you're struggling with something like this, I feel like this is the best way to wrap up. There is nothing wrong with you as a person. There's nothing wrong with your character if you're struggling with this. The things you're struggling with are not supposed to be this hard. The reason they're hard, the reason they're so difficult, is because you're suffering from a disease. You're sick. You need medicine. Maybe in form of actual literal medicine you take, but maybe in the form of a conversation with a friend, or just some time to relax and genuinely relax and not feel anxious. And yeah, for my first outing with this vlog, I feel like this is a good place to end. If nothing else, I feel like I get to sign off with some pretty good advice. So if you sat through all this, thank you for listening. And hopefully this is a project that I will be able to keep on working on. So for now, see you around, world.